And these are ones that are kind of quite universal Christmas ideas. So we're going to be doing a robin, we're going to be doing some Christmas baubles, and we're going to be doing maybe a stick of holly or something. The reason why I've chose these because they're colourful, they're quite bright, and they're quite fun. Some ideas that I've done previously have been a little bit unusual. One year I did a snowman Kama Sutra, which was obviously snowmen in different interesting positions. That was very funny. And I've done some more esoteric and with printing stuff and all sorts of different stuff. But this year I thought I'd keep it quite traditional, so it'll appeal to as many people as possible. And yeah, so shall we have a paint and a play and see what we can come up with? So for these cards I'm using some cardi paper, which is a sort of handmade paper made in India, and it's got a really rough texture to it, and as you can see, when it's cut or you tear it, it creates these wonderful rough edges. Now the reason I'm using this paper is because it is a nice contrast to the cardstock that I have. So this cardi paper just looks really cool when it's stuck to those blank cards that I use. So this is a little bauble sort of design that I'm doing, two little shiny baubles. I'm using my food pen here. This is a Food pen, Sailor Manon. I think it's a 55 degrees one. They're only about 15, 20 bucks. They're quite cheap. They're really good fun to sketch with, and I particularly like them on the rough paper. Now I know a bauble is a beautiful round smooth glass object that doesn't really have a lot of texture to it, but I'm just choosing to sort of stylize this sketch a little bit by adding a little bit of different sort of line widths and things like that. I just think it adds interest to what would be maybe not that interesting a sort of drawing, really, sort of stylistically, if you know what I mean. I mean, you could just use a single single fine liner, or you could even use a compass and get a perfectly round line, or a template. It's up to you, you know. These cards are just fun. One of the things I quite like to do with these cards is keep them simple, because if you're going to be doing a few of them for friends, maybe sort of 10 people, 20 people or whatever, you don't want to be too committed time-wise. And if you batch them, you know, if you did a sort of batch of them in one evening, you could probably quite easily do, 10 or so. Particularly if you get quite loose and free with the painting style, don't get too hung up with sort of details and things like that. Right, so the next card I'm doing here is probably the most challenging in terms of the line work. This is going to be a sprig of holly. Now I should have downloaded a reference picture, but this is holly from my brain. This is from my imagination, so I'm not quite sure even how accurate it is. But I guess that doesn't really matter, as long as it's vaguely recognisable for what it is. Now, I'm not quite sure where you are in the world, what Christmas foliage you would associate with Christmas, or sort of that time of the year, the sort of winter solstice and things like that. But in Europe, holly is a very traditional thing to bring into the house at Christmas, because it's obviously an evergreen. So if you were celebrating that time of year, the changing of the days becoming longer, and that middle bit of winter, whether it was a pagan or a Christian beliefs, the evergreen foliage was quite a big part of that. So I suspect people have been bringing holly into their houses probably way back into the sort of Paleolithic or something, I would have thought. And the pen I'm using here for the line work on the holly is a little Kawako Sport pen. This is a very old design, still being made today, and the idea of it's a very much a pocket pen. It's small, so when you post it, it becomes a full-length pen, but you can also actually hold it as like a half-size pen, and I quite like sketching with it like that sometimes. This is an extra fine nib. They're pretty stiff nibs, so you can kind of be a bit rough with them, really, and get some interesting textures and some quite interesting mark making. I just like them. They're a fun little pen, very reliable. One of the biggest downsides of a little pen like this is it's quite a short cartridge in there, so if it's It doesn't really hold a lot of ink, you know, but that's not a problem, and at least it means that you get to sort of refresh the ink regularly. So what I'm doing is I'm just going in with a single line width here and all the way around, getting the basic lines in, and then what I'll do is I'll go round with a slightly thicker line just to sort of tell a little bit more of an interesting story. So I think my Cavaco Sport here is giving up the ghost a little bit. I think it's probably running out of ink and I can't be bothered to change it, so I'll pick up my big Opus 88 fountain pen, which is an eyedropper pen. You basically fill up the whole sort of shaft of the pen, if you know what I mean, with ink, so it just goes on and on and on forever. So it tends to be my go-to pen that I pick up whenever I'm going out because it's got the least chance of it being empty. And I'm just going to create some more interesting outline here, you know, just to try and make it pop off the page a little bit. Maybe a little bit of shadow line underneath some of these red berries. So when I previously recorded this, it was on an evening and I didn't really want to be doing any commentary or anything. So I'm recording the commentary after I've recorded the video of it. And I'm doing it sat on my computer, so if you can hear a whirring in the background, that's my old PC struggling with all this video editing that I've been asking it to do. So the next one, the last one, which is probably the funniest, is a couple of robins. Now I do roughly sketch these out in pencil. As you can see, I forgot to press record as a classic, and then I'm going to go around and just show a bit of their fluffiness with this outline. Now, one of the things that if you're ever sketching, you know, birds or even people actually, is, you know, if you're looking for a reference picture, try and choose one where they're looking animated. You know, try and choose a picture where there's some movement in the body and in the face, you know, because that can give you a little bit of latitude for it not being massively accurate, if you know what I mean. But it also means that you can tell a little bit of a story. So I don't know what story you could put to this, you know, maybe one little Christmas robin's got a bit carried away and he's telling a story, and the other one here, maybe it's his partner looking at him thinking, "Be quiet, Roger." Or maybe it's the Robin Christmas party and it's all kicking off and this guy's throwing out some shapes, trying to impress this other Lady Robin. I don't know. You can make up your own story. There's something definitely going on with these robins though. So we'll whiz through a little bit of this line work. It's nice, quite like that. I think it's quite a nice, fun little simple drawing. So then it's time for the watercolours. Now, as I say, I'm doing these in a batch, so I'm going to kind of do them in 3 at a time quickly, then sort of hair dry them and do another layer. So I've obviously wet inside the baubles. I've just let some water sit there for just a minute, you know, a nice pool of water. You can still see the water the paper is ever so slightly glossy, so it still is wet. And then I'm just going to go in with some pure pigment. I'm not going to bother with mixing any colours. I'm just going to go with this is a quinacridone rose. I'm just going to do something like that. It's pretty straightforward. I might even add a little bit more pigment just to make it pop a little bit. Now I can't do the other one yet because that has to dry first, so I'll put that to one side and we'll do a little bit of work on the holly. So with the holly, I'm actually going in with different pure pigments. I'm not going to mix much in the palette. I'm going to just put in a little bit of natural sienna there, a little bit of quinacridone rose, there's a bit of Van Dyke brown, that's I think some undersea green, that sap green going on there, that bright green. So what I've kind of done is a vague bit of underpainting with those, and then I've added in the green pigment on top. And what I'm doing with the top ones is I'm going in with just a more basic green pigment, and then I'll probably add in something that's a splosh of Van Dyke brown. I'm not quite sure why that dark is quite so dark, but anyway. The idea is I just don't want a uniform colour to these necessarily. I want them to be, you know, slightly different colours. So I'm doing these berries, nice bright red, And then as I really could have, holly's actually quite pale as a wood, so I could have put a background in this and let everything just sort of stand off. But I think I've chosen to sort of paint a little bit of a brown in there. And there we go. Now, I think some red sploshes on the top of this won't do any harm, just to add a little bit of anarchy, a bit of interest. Maybe some sploshes of green too. So there you go. I'll put that to one side and come back to that one, and then it's time for these riotous robins. So what are these guys going to be getting up to? Well, I think I've actually gone to the trouble of having a look at a few robins on the interweb, and it never ceases to amaze me how we get so tied up in our own sort of geographical privilege, if you know what I mean. Like, I know what a robin looks like. Of course I know what a robin looks like. And then you go to America and you realise they have a bird called a robin that is a completely different thing. And I'm sure it's probably the same throughout the world. An American robin is a much bigger chap. But yeah, it's really interesting how we you know, how the taxonomy, is it taxonomy, how things are named? But anyway, so this is vaguely based on a sort of European robin, a sort of quite an indistinct looking bird, but then it has this amazing red patch on its throat. And that is one of the most iconic sort of distinctive images for Christmas, I think, particularly in you know, in a lot of Europe, is the robin, because it's a bird that's around a lot in winter. You see it a lot, you know, it stands out with its bright red throat. And these are often referred to, I think, as like a gardener's friend. And what they like to do is, if you're digging in the garden, they'll come and wait for you to turn the soil over and then nip in and pull up some worms. So they're often quite easy to spot, particularly if you're doing any gardening in winter. So we're just going to do a bit more extra work on some of these that have dried now. So we're going to go back to the bauble and do the other bauble. So I have just done the same with this one, where I've wet the inside of the colour that I want to do and let that sit just for a minute. And then I'm going to use some quinacridone gold here, and that's a very Christmassy colour, isn't it? And these are Daniel Smith paints that I'm using. There you go, and then we'll probably just leave that for now. I might just put a little bit of shadow underneath there. Just with a sort of moon glow, just to sort of try and show that it's actually sitting on a tabletop. Okay, so back to the holly. So we're just going to do a tiny bit on the leaves here. And that is just to try and show that there is some form in the leaves. There is a little bit of... so we go back to the... yeah, and I'm just going to put a little bit of shadow in there under those berries, and then I'll probably come back in with a highlight, and because, you know, they're quite glossy, holly, and the leaves, they're quite lovely, so we'll go back in and probably put some highlights on those. So back to these rowdy robins then. They're shouting about something, aren't they? So we're going to put some shadow under their tummies just to try and make them look a bit more spherical. And then we'll probably put in, yeah, these feather details here. Now, as I said before, these are not like accurate bird renderings at all. They are just fun little characters to go on a Christmas card. So we're not going to be too precious about it. So it's now some of the final touches. So with this one, I think I decided to go and put a bit of green in the background, just to try and tell the story as if these are sitting waiting to go on the Christmas tree. And I thought they just looked a little bit sad on their own. So I just added in a mixture of sap green and then some of the undersea green, both Daniel Smith colours, and I think it just gives you a sort of vague Christmassy background. And when I go back in with my highlighter and maybe a little bit of bleed-proof white, I can add a few sparkles and twinkles in the background. Good, good. So here I'm using, yeah, my bleed-proof white, which is basically just a white paint, but it's when you put it on, it's quite thick, and you don't get any transparency, so it's good for sort of highlights, things like that. So I'm going to use that here just to pick out a few highlights on the leaves, just to get a little sense of them being glossy, you know. You don't need to do a lot. A few white spots, again, just to try and show a bit of texture. You know, you don't have to be too precious. So I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here with these guys. Maybe just adding in a few dots of white, a few little spots of white. Or maybe a highlight across the top of them, yeah. A little dot on the beak. And then finally, with the baubles, putting in a couple of nice bright catch lights. And then in the background, oh, I'm adding in the some of the silver. There we go. And then I'm just going to create some spots in the background and then dilute a little bit of the blueproof white to make it slightly transparent. And then I'm going to put in a few little, as if there's sort of some fairy lights behind. A few little starry details. It's a bit cliche, but you know, that's Christmas. If I get my big fat hand out of the way, you better see what I'm doing. There you go. So I don't think we're far off really with those. So yeah, you could do one design or you could do a few different designs, and you wouldn't even necessarily have to go down the route of hand drawing them. Another idea would be to use some printing techniques, you know, some basic printing type method would be fun. But yeah, I mean, I think people just appreciate it when they get something that's got a little bit of time and craft in it. So have a go at that. I should have done this a few weeks earlier this year, but never mind. Merry Christmas. See you next time. Bye bye. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun. I thought those two little robins were a bit interesting, a bit characterful. I don't know what they were chatting about, but it was obviously all kicking off. So yeah, I hope you liked that. As always, there's going to be a slightly longer version of this on my Patreon. And I just want to thank all you guys who like and subscribe and comment and do all that stuff to keep this channel rocking on. It's all appreciated. I better go and make my list and post it off to Santa, see what he brings me this year. Okay, all the best. Stay warm, stay safe. Bye-bye.